Thank you so much, Silvia, for your very, very comprehensive presentation. It was very interesting listening to you and you know, I mean, a special thanks for summarizing the very stark situation that women and women self-employed are experiencing now. And I think, you know, we also all heard the statistics about domestic violence being on the increase and how much for these women, going to their workplace, place of work can actually be a salvation, can be a respite from what they're experiencing at home. But also COVID is acting as a kind of a reality check, I think, on all the structural problems that existed before. And if women could be in more jobs that are ICT or digital, more that can be carried out from home, they're better paid, offering perhaps better overall financial support is I think that's also something that is now highlighted by the crisis. So thank you, Sylvia. Julianne indicates that she will have to leave, and I think Sylvia, you too, right? You also will have to leave. So I wonder if we have some questions from the participants to Sylvia and to Julianne. We have actually two questions to Sylvia. One is from Jean-Pierre, who is asking, do you have any statistics about the results of your programs dedicated to women? Do you have any statistics or from the results or yeah?
Yeah, we do have data about that, but I don't have them now, but I can hand in them later if you're interested in the success of our program.
That would be great. If Sylvia, you could perhaps send me the statistics or the data you have. I'm going to be forwarding that to Jean-Philippe. So thank you for that. Then we have another question. If Emanuela Maestro Pietro is interested in the Women in Craft and Technical Profession program, what kind of support is included in the program, and what are the incentives or benefits for the enterprises? I think that could be a very interesting question.
Yeah, well, at first, of course, that they have diversity of co-workers. We know that this is inspiring for the crowd of workers. And well, when they're doing this this training or this education with the women, they don't get exactly money for that.
Mm-hmm. So it should contribute to their business objectives, if becoming more innovative, becoming more representative of their clients through diversity and inclusion, not necessarily through subsidies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Sylvia. There's one question to Julianne. I think you have seen that question, right? No, it's about the functioning of parental leave, the new right. Valeria would like to better understand what the directive asks to member states in terms of improving the uptake and involve more men. I'm going to also then ask this question to Álvaro maybe at the end, but Julianne, if you could maybe come back to that on the parental leave for men and what member states are going to do to improve the uptake and involve more men.
So indeed, as I said, on parental leave, it's a right for both. So to involve more men, question mark, because from the beginning, this right is supposed to be for both. Why is it not necessarily taken by both? And it's the question that I mentioned before, it's directly linked to the payment. And the fact that, you know, and so linked to stereotypes, linked to the payment, linked to the role of the men and women. So all basically the barriers that I mentioned before. So to overcome that difficulty, of course, the importance is the compensation and the fact that this right is not seen as, you know, something that is taken only by women because they earn less, because anyway they're already part-timers, because, you know, all the context that we know. So to improve the fact that men should take parental leave as well is directly linked to the compensation and to the payment and to the fight against stereotypes, and to say that that right is for both and not for women. And I think that even, you know, when we talk about it, it's people think, oh yeah, true, there is maternity for women, and then you prolong it and it's called the parental leave. No, it's not that. It's when a child is there, parental leave is not only, you know, for the birth to you know, to have a few more months or later to take care of your child. Is really for both. And we have additional rights in this revision. So what are these additional rights? So as I said, in the past, we had 4 months for each parent, for each child. 1 month was not transferable in the past. So which means that the father could transfer 3 months basically to the mother, or the other way around. And of course, it doesn't help, because if you can transfer almost the entire parental leave, it goes in the bad direction. So this was rebalanced. Now only 2 months are transferable. So if the father or the mother can only transfer half of the leave. The other important element was, even if it's not enough for us, it's still very good, and we fight it really a lot for that. The fact that at least the payment is recognized as an important element. So we don't have a specific level, because we said that it should be paid at adequate level, but that's a progress. And I think that with this first step, now in the transposition phase, this is what we should improve.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julianne. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you very much, Julianne, for being with us this morning. And I think you can leave now. You're free to leave this webinar. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks again for the invitation, both because the content of the webinar is of great importance, but also because it was a well-organized webinar, I have to say. That was a pleasure to join you and to meet you as well. Thank you,
Julianne. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Bye.
Thank you, Sylvia. So we're going back to the speakers. I have to also get myself organized here a little bit. Yes. So our next speaker is Stacy Egemonos. He is the executive director of Eurocarers. Eurocarers, this European network organization representing the interest of family carers, informal carers. And we were very particularly interested to have the voice of carers and long-term carers on this webinar, because a lot of what the Equal Project was focusing on is looking at people who have been out of the labor market for a while because of their care responsibilities. And we know how important it is for carers to have access to paid work, firstly because of the finances and the financial implication, but also because it's good for breaking their social isolation, it's good for their mental health. So thank you very much, Stacy, for accepting the invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agnes. Thanks a million for your invitation. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I think it's a very interesting conversation and a very interesting and timely project as well, I must say. So let me try and share my screen with you. There you go. Can you all see my slides? Great. So thank you for your introduction. So yes, essentially the role of Eurocarers, the organization I represent, is to convey the voice of family carers, unpaid carers at European level. We work closely with the Commission, DG Employment, on long-term care, but also on work-life balance, of course, and on gender equality, among other topics. But we also work with, obviously, national and regional authorities through our network, which currently consists of 73 organizations in 26 countries. We do research to bring the evidence, but we also do obviously advocacy, and our member organizations provide direct services to carers. So information, training, respite care, you know, in a long list of services. So my job this morning is indeed to shed light on the situation and needs of informal carers, which in fairness is a topic that's growing on the EU agenda. At least in the last few years, we've seen more and more stakeholders, and at the top of that list, obviously, there is the Commission and a growing number of countries. But yet, at the same time, when you look at, you know, recent policy developments, and that includes the Work-Life Balance Directive, I'll get to that at the end of my presentation. Carers are mentioned, but they still, it seems, slightly overlooked, and we're trying to change that. So just a few words about what we know regarding the situation of informal carers across Europe. All of this, everything I'm going to say in the next few minutes, is based on either data collected by the Commission or EU agencies themselves, or by EU-funded projects, including obviously the work of my network. It is important to speak about informal carers at European level because they are the main providers of long-term care in Europe today. According to some estimates, as much as 80% of all long-term care in Europe is actually provided by families, friends, neighbors. The number of carers in Europe is also significant, depending on the definition used. It's between 10 to 20% of the EU population, so between 45 and 90 million people. By the way, the definition we use is of an informal carer is a person who provides usually unpaid care, long-term care, to a person with a chronic disease, a disability, or any other long-lasting care needs. So that includes, for example, mental health issues or an addiction outside of a professional context. So based on this definition, we are closer to 20% of the population. As mentioned at various occasions already in previous presentations, there's a strong gender dimension to the issue of informal care. And a typical carer in Europe today is a woman. They provide 2/3 of all informal long-term care in Europe. And it's a woman between 45 and 75 years of age, which means most carers and most female carers are of working age, and therefore, obviously, and this is the key issue for our discussion today, informal care is often a barrier to employment, or at least full-time employment. When it comes to the economic value of informal care, which is, I'm sorry to say, a topic we have to delve into quite extensively in the last few years, because at the end of the day, that's a convincing argument, obviously, for decision makers. Again, based on various EU research or EU-funded research, the estimated value is between 50 and 90% of the overall cost of formal long-term care. And according to a report published by DG ECFIN in 2018, if we were to try and replace all informal carers by professional care workers by 2070, that would entail an increase in the share of GDP devoted to long-term care of 130% on average for the EU, which basically means creating a completely new long-term care system, the second one. So we are already struggling to fund the current long-term care system. So the key message here is there's no universal access to long-term care in the foreseeable future in Europe without informal carers. Having said that, when they are not adequately supported, unfortunately, informal carers face a long list of challenges. Work-life balance is one of them, and I'll get into the details of that in my next slides. But I also want to mention, poverty and social exclusion, which are very prevalent among carers. Obviously, the difficulty in accessing a full-time job or the labor market altogether is one of the key drivers of that. but it's not the only driver. We see that many carers, for example, tend to contribute financially to the care costs of the person they care for. They have higher utility bills, they have transportation costs, and so on and so forth. And just to illustrate this, as an example, 1/3 of carers in the UK are in debt as a result of their caregiving. In addition, there's also a huge impact of informal care on carers themselves when it comes to their own health and well-being. There again, to illustrate the prevalence of mental health issues, so depression and the feeling of being isolated among non-working carers is 20% higher than among non-carers. So this means, when again not adequately supported, this leads to a vicious circle where carers become patients themselves, and that adds to the list of issues. Now, this table is based on data collected by Eurofound in 2018. It's actually based on the European Quality of Life survey carried out by Eurofound. And I think the interesting aspect in this table is that it does not only show an estimate of the prevalence of informal care in each of the countries, but also it includes data about working carers and non-working carers. And what's really striking here is you see that a majority of carers actually are in employment. So they combine work and care. Now, based on additional research we have, not on the European Quality of Life and Life Survey, we know that between 7 and 21% of informal carers tend to reduce their working hours as a result of their caregiving. This means that not only do many carers combine work and care, but majority of them are in full-time employment. So we see cases in our network where essentially you have people who have 2 full-time jobs. They have the normal kind of full-time job in the office every day, and then they go home and they have to deal with another full-time job, which is obviously their caregiving. And that leads to all sorts of issues in terms of, again, depression, exhaustion. When it comes to employers themselves are facing a lot of difficulties as a result of that in terms of absenteeism, many carers using their sick leave to try and cope with the difficulty they face, but also presenteeism, which is basically people going to work, but they are there physically, but their mind is elsewhere. Still there are some people leaving their employment altogether, which is the key topic for today. Between 3 and 18% of working carers leave the labor market altogether as a result of their caregiving. And again, that's an issue also for employers. And an interesting thing that we see also through our work is that more and more employers tend to realize that it is a win-win to communicate internally among their employees about caregiving and to put in place support measures for their employees with caregiving responsibilities, because they see then a reduced number in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, and obviously it's cheaper to put those measures in place than to try and replace, an employee with, extensive experience and to try and find someone who's good enough to take over. By the way, the number of the prevalence of caregiving in Italy, which I think is one of the key countries explored in the project, is 7 million, according to a report published by the Italian Institute of Statistics back in 2015. But according to so that's about 12% of the population. But according to the OECD, again, to show the differences, as much as 26% of the population in Italy is actually involved in caregiving. So that's another key message, and probably for the Commission, and we're working closely with DG Employment, but also with the European Parliament on that question. We need better quality data about the prevalence of informal caregiving in Europe, because the figures we have are probably underestimations of the actual issue. Now, what do carers need and what do they want? This is based on a Eurobarometer survey carried out a few years ago. This is by order of importance, by the way. Financial support comes first, which is not surprising based on what I said before in terms of social exclusion and poverty, but also because when you think of it, you know, informal carers tend to contribute to the cost of caregiving, obviously, and they are an added value not only for care systems but also for society as a whole. If it wasn't for them, obviously our social protection services would have to assume those costs, and probably that would be even more expensive. So that should be recognized, and therefore their role should be at the very least compensated. Second on the list is the topic for the day, flexible working conditions and access to employment and access to a carer's leave, paid or unpaid. And as we know, the work-life balance introduced that. It was mentioned before. Unfortunately, from our perspective, unpaid. But again, I'll get to that in my next slide. Pension credits comes third on the list, and that's an important one because it's not a topic that's being discussed at the moment. And pension credits, that means that, you know, many carers spend a long time providing care, sometimes a few years, and that time should be taken into consideration in the calculation of pension credits, given again the contribution of carers to care systems and society as a whole, and also to try and address the gender pension gap, not only the pay gap that was mentioned earlier. And then on the list you have access to regular breaks, just the possibility to take a breather from time to time, and access to information and training. You know, majority of carers become carers overnight. They have no idea whether they have access to rights in their country or region. And they even, you know, most of them struggle to even find basic information about the, you know, the disease they will have to deal with from now on a daily basis. So this needs to be improved. This is my last slide on the Work-Life Balance Directive, which, again, in fairness, took us a lot of energy and time, but we see it as a breakthrough in our movement, because for the first time, the directive introduces a new wide set of rights for carers, including a carer's leave of 5 days per worker per year, which it should be said, in some countries, 5 days, obviously it's a super limited number. And some of our members were very critical about the proposal, but we see this as a key step forward, because that also entails you now need to define who the carers are, what is informal care in your legislation, and we're keeping a close eye on that. And you need to try and identify those carers and promote, obviously, the new rights. But carers leave of 5 days per year, plus flexible working conditions. Again, that was mentioned before, but it should be said, the part about flexible working conditions is part of the non-legislative chapter of the directive. So it's only on a voluntary basis. From our perspective, the most important word in the directive is minimum, because the directive introduces a minimum set of rights. And that's the word, I think, in the implementation of the rights introduced by the directive. That's the word that should be reminded to decision makers across Europe on a regular basis, to make sure we go beyond, you know, the rights introduced by the directive. If I'm not mistaken, by the way, the recently approved new EU strategy, gender strategy, actually one of the objectives is to do that, is to encourage member states to go beyond the Work-Life Balance Directive. Now, at the end of last year, we published an analysis of the implementation of the Work-Life Balance Directive and in particular the carers' rights. At first glance, a majority of countries already are in full compliance with the directive, the carers' leave, and to some extent, the flexible working conditions. So great, but obviously, as always, the devil is in the details. And so when you look at the details, it's not that simple. First of all, when you look at the definition used for informal care, it's very often narrow focused. Either it focuses, there's a strong focus on disability. It is the case, for example, in Italy, but also in Cyprus, Estonia, Slovenia, and others, or on a specific disease. It is the case, for example, in Spain and Greece, where access to a leave to care for someone with long-lasting care needs is related to cancer. So this is kind of paradoxical because one of the justifications for the introduction of carers' rights in the directive was demographic aging and the fact that we need to adapt European societies to that. So this is something we need to keep an eye on because that's not sufficient. Secondly, there are also very strict eligibility criteria attached to the carers' leave and to the flexible working conditions. Again, just to give you an example, in Bulgaria, the care leave is only granted if no other unemployed family member is available. If another family member who is unemployed is available, then he or she should be the informal carer. So basically, the informal caregiving responsibility is forced upon someone in the family. So again, that's another barrier to accessing the new rights. Thirdly, it is often the case that access to those rights, and again, particularly when it comes to flexible working conditions, that's based on the benevolence of the employer. So for example, again, in the Czech Republic, employers are only obliged to excuse an employee's absence from work if care is provided to a sick child under 10. So not only is it very strict in terms of the eligibility criteria, but it's up to the employer to actually decide whether or not the right will be granted. So this is an unfinished journey. We need to keep a close eye on things. We need to encourage member states to go beyond the Work-Life Balance Directive, even though, again, to finish on a positive note, this is a great tool, for the promotion of our message. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stacey. I really enjoyed listening to you and all the insights you got from the research and your members. I think very, very important issues there. And I just couldn't help but think that, again, the pandemic may be a kind of an accelerator for the work you're doing, as we see, for example, with long COVID, for example, all the people who are suffering months and months of long-term consequences of COVID, they will have to be taken care of. So it just adds and piles up. But maybe, having this in place is already a start, as you say, and then it's perhaps individual member states who have to change the way they approach this and become more generous or more understanding of the situation.
You can definitely rely on us, and I hope it's going to be more than us, but you can definitely rely on us to keep pushing for more.
That's great. So now we come to the questions and answers session. We have maybe about 5 minutes left, I think, to discuss. And I think there were a few questions to Álvaro. If Álvaro, you are still here, there's been a question.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So 2 questions I wanted to also ask to you. One was about whether there are some welfare, corporate welfare programs included in the directive, or whether there's another directive that's going to focus on employee well-being and corporate welfare? And then the other question is about incentivizing member states in supporting the take-up of parental leave or carers leave. What are maybe some of the provisions you have seen there?
Okay, so let me be blunt. This is a directive. This is not a new religion, okay? And we are not a new church. So more seriously. Yes, we have the directive as the aim of doing a bit of all of that. But as far as corporate welfare is concerned, I'm not sure exactly what was the intention of the question, because sometimes we talk about corporate welfare like tax breaks, like subsidies that are given to enterprises. Well, I take the question as, probably correct me if I'm wrong, as something like more related about what is been doing, what is the relation of the directive with the internal organization of the enterprises. So in this regard, what I can say there are two issues. One is that, of course, more generally, the directive, the Commission, takes into consideration the social reality and the economic reality. So how will this be put into practice? And in the directive, very concretely, there are several situations where the interests of both the workers, which are of course the main beneficiaries of the directives, but also the interests of the employer are taken in consideration. For example, very simply, when the enterprise requires or necessitates needs that parental leave is not taken immediately, but is taken later. So there are limits for that, of course. An employer cannot just say to a worker that you will take that in 10 years. That's not possible. So the member states must put limits to that. But another situation also where the interests of the workers and the employers are taken into account are the requests for flexible working arrangements. So there, the employer has the duty to take into account both its own interests and the interests of the worker in order to see how, to what extent, and how it is possible to actually accept the requests for for flexible working arrangements. Sorry. Another aspect where the Commission is not directly related with the directive, but it's part of the same issue, of the same situation, is the fact that, and I will send it to you now, we have taken into account in the communication that we made in 2017 an initiative to support work-life balance. So this goes beyond the directive. We, of course, then we did not yet, the European Union did not yet adopt the directive, but we talked about the future directive, but we also talked about many more issues. And I just give you an example, the fact that structural funds, European Union structural funds, should be better used in order to create care for children, or structures to ensure childcare and to ensure also long-term care. So both for children and for elderly people, to make it quite simple. So this again shows that we take into account the economic reality and how it works, because it's very nice. We all know we depend from each other, and it's very nice to say that people should be able, for example, to request flexible working arrangements, but in any case, they will have to leave their children somewhere or their elderly people somewhere when they are working, you know? And even to ensure, so both the possibilities, the fact that they can go to work when it's necessary and that they may be absent to work when is indispensable, then one of the elements is the existence of caring structures. And we, in this communication, we try to set the way in order to have a better use of the structural funds for that purpose. So sorry for the long explanation, like a long joke, but that's what I can say about this. Meanwhile, on how to involve men, so again, this is a bit like, you know, matrimony law. There is no law where where it says that the couple has to love each other. there is the law where it says that where are the rights, what are the duties, and establish minimum conditions. So in a way, that's what the directive says here, very concretely. So I recapitulate what has been said. Before this directive, so before August 2022, the European law provides for the right for a parental leave for each worker for 4 months. 4 months of parental leave not paid. And one of these months cannot be transferred between the parents. So with new directive, we still have 4 months of parental leave, but what is important is that 2 of those 4 months are paid. And this is important because this stimulates fathers to take the leave. Clearly, if your leave is not paid, you are not going to be stimulated to take it. If it is paid, not only very concretely in your case, it's easier, but also the social pressure, it's bigger. Why aren't you taking it? You know, because it is easier to take it. It makes more sense to take it. And the same thing for the non-transferability. So instead of 1 month before, we now have 2 months non-transferable. So if the father does not take these months, they will be lost. And it has been observed in many European countries, not all, but many, when the parental leave is non-transferable, men take it up more often, because otherwise the right will be lost. Maybe sometimes they only take up the non-transferable months, 1, 2, 3, 4 months. And then the women still usually take up more. But there is already some involvement, and that's what we want. It's to create a dynamic. Of course, this is not going to be a revolution. Yes, of course, Agamenon is right that there are pending issues, and there is certainly room for improvement, but at least we hope that we are on the right track, and the next big step will be to ensure the implementation of this directive. Sorry, I stop here.
No, thank you very much. And actually another question has just come up, and it's a little bit along the same lines. Whether there's any, how to link the directive, which you say is a law, to incentivizing especially small and medium-sized companies, but employers to offer flexible working and be more accepting of flexible working. Is there some kind of cascading link, or the directive just outlines the right to request flexible working, and then it's somehow other actors on the ground who should be doing the work of sensitivization, of training? How do you see that from the Commission's perspective?
Well, as usual, and Agnes, thanks very much for putting that in a very structural way. I like that. In fact, what happens is that, as usual, we have to work together. And of course, there is always, there can be always a discussion of exactly is expected from one side or from the others. It's clear that the directive on one side sets minimum standards. But on the other hand, we understand, as I just said before, that we have to take in consideration how it works in practice. And clearly here, the small and medium enterprises are crucial because, notably because most of the labor force in many member states actually is, we can find it in small and medium enterprises. And there, I mean, I don't have in mind anything particularly on work-life balance. We have a lot of projects for small and medium enterprises, but from the top of my mind, I'm sorry, I cannot remember anything in particular, but I know that our colleagues are working on that. So I'm personally not working on that, but we know that we are working on that. And of course, this communication that we issued in 2017, it's, I think it's doomed to be revised sooner or later. So I take note also of that in that framework.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Álvaro. Can I circle back to Barbara for a second on this? Because Barbara, from her work with diversity, training you have experience on employers being open to, becoming more open to diversifying their workforce, which also means maybe flexible working for women, for carers, but also in terms of the toolkit, because the Equal Toolkit partly targets SME employers. So how do you see that, the cascading of the directive into the small and medium-sized companies?
Thank you for the question, Agnes. I think it will have a push factor, very important, no? Because especially in some contexts, when the directive is adopted and transformed into legislation, we know that there are some changes that, for which legislation is a push factor, no? So we can build a business case, and the business case is important to motivate entrepreneurs, but if there are some obligations and compulsory timing, this would be a push factor, especially in some contexts. So I think it would be very important. And at the same time, for very small companies, especially in Italy, are you hearing me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, no, because I see all reason. Yeah, no, I said especially for small companies where and in Italy where there is not a, let's say, a human resource function always clearly indicated, and everything stands with the entrepreneur. If there is a clear legislative framework that gives a push for the adoption of work-life balance measures, this will be an additional positive factor for the implementation.
Absolutely, and I think that's somehow always the bottleneck, and actually the bottleneck for the directive, for the Equal project, is going to happen at perhaps even team leader, so very micro level. We know that in organizations it's very often the direct supervisor, the team leader, who is creating a workplace which is either inclusive and accepting of outside of work care and other responsibilities or not. So I think there's still a lot of way to go to cascading this down to those employers who haven't seen the light yet, who are not yet understanding that this is the new world of work, and this is what's happening.
And on this, just to complement, I think it's not only an issue of resources. So it would be important to put resources, money, funds to sustain this, but it would be also important to provide tools. That's why we put a section on SMEs in our tool, because sometimes it's not only having access to resources, but also knowing what they can do, how they can do it, and if in and how to smaller contexts.
Sorry, do you just want to repeat that very last part, because we lost you there a little bit?
Yeah, that's it's not only an issue of resources, but it's also an issue of tools, so that company can see that what happens in bigger companies can be adapted to their scale, and also in smaller measures and in.
Okay, I think we lost a little bit Barbara. Thank you very much to all of you for participating in today's webinar. I don't want to now start summing up the whole webinar just for the sake of taking a little bit more time, but I think it has been an excellent conversation, really fantastic input from all the panelists. So a really big thank you to all of you who decided to accept our invitation and join the conversation. Maybe I will just flash up the website of the project again, and ask for Chiara to just share with you what are going to be the next steps of the project, where we're going from here.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone for very, very interesting day and webinar, especially to Agnes. What's the next step? In Italy, we have got a big problem. The people don't work. The unemployment people after the pandemic, especially women unemployed after the pandemic. So I think that our original idea of the project, working with unemployment people on work and life measures, it's still important and necessary, very necessary. So I think, and also it's important to start and to start from employment services, because nowadays people doesn't look for a job because they don't think that especially women, it's easier, is it possible to find a job if nowadays, if they have care problems. So I think in the future we continue also with the ESF help, Social European Fund, to carry on and the problem of unemployment people with work-life problems. In Italy, the public employment services are going to change because we don't have a good employment services, and now the government and at a local level, because public employment services are from the public local policies. So I think that the results of projects and also the methodology will be held. Now we worked only in 4 regions. For the future, we want to implement the project, the result of the methodology to all PIS in Italy, with the help of the European Social Fund. This is the first and the question and the what we want to do in the future now, after we hope after the pandemic. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for my bad English.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Thank you for giving us a little bit the roadmap of what is going to go on with the project. On behalf of the Equal Project and the consortium, I would like to thank all of the panelists again. It has been, for me, and I'm sure for all the participants, a very rich conversation, something that definitely needs to continue. And I would like to also thank all our participants for joining and sticking around. And I'm sure we will continue this conversation. So thank you very much. And we'll be sending out the recording of the webinar and the presentations shortly. So thank you very much. Have a good day.